Okay, there's an interesting post here from Cato at Liberty, and the post was entitled "Immigrants Don't Grow Government." This was by Alex Nowrasteh. 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 I don't know how to pronounce his name. Says, and here's from his profile. Says his work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Houston Chronicle, Boston Globe, San Jose Mercury, Richmond Times-Dispatch, Huffington Post, Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, and elsewhere. Alex has appeared on Fox News and numerous television and radio stations in the United States. He received his BA in Economics from George Mason University and Master's in Economic History from the London School of Economics. So, this guy is not a nobody. I haven't heard of him before, but certainly hasn't heard of me. And his post is very, well, here's what he does. He basically does a correlation between immigrants and outlays per capita. And he also looks at, he looks at the general trend lines. There's a correlation between the two. And he looks at first and second generation immigrants and outlays per capita, right? And he does this over the period from 1901 to where does this scale end? About 2010 is the last number on the scale. I don't know if that's where the scale formally ends. But looking through it, I don't see any 2011s here. So basically, he's looking at between the years 1901 and 2010. And I'll just, read a little bit at the end here. It says, during the 1901 to 1930 period, a time when immigration was less restricted, government outlays as a percent of GDP grew by 1.3 times. During the 1930 to 1970 period of heavy immigration restrictions, federal outlays as a percent of GDP increased by 6.3-fold. Right? So when immigration was restricted, government as a percentage of GDP increased by 6.3 times. Whereas when you had a more open immigration policy, it only increased by 1.3 times. Right? Then at the end he says here, quote, to be clear, these are merely correlations, and I am not arguing that more immigration results in smaller government. It could be that a smaller government attracts more immigrants, or there could be no causal relationship here. I am merely showing that the persistent claims of immigrants causing an increase in the size of government do not match the facts. Okay, so let's dissect this first statement. It could be that smaller government attracts more immigrants, or there could be no causal relationship here. Okay. Third, first off, this is a false bind. Right? This is a false... it's a false bind Okay, first off, it excludes the third possibility. The third possibility is that there is a causal relationship between immigrants back in 1901, right? Back in 1901 to 1930, when we're talking about white immigrants. There could be a causal relationship there between those immigrant populations supporting bigger government, right? And the result would have been if they had not come into the United States, if those white immigrants from 1901 to 1930 did not enter the United States, that government could have been smaller than it ended up being because of the effect of these immigrant population votes, right? There's that possibility. And that seems to me, that appears to be like a really obvious thing that you haven't ruled out. It's possible that they didn't. It's possible that these immigrant populations basically voted along lines with the rest of the general white population. There's that possibility. Okay, but there's also a possibility that these immigrants, to the extent that they voted for expansions in government over and above what the native population voted for. And so whatever impact they had was in the direction of expansion of government. It's just that whatever it is, the native population was able to prevent that from having any real influence on policy itself. Okay, so there's that, and he doesn't, right? And that seems like such an obvious thing that you have to deal with, right? But he doesn't deal with that. So this statement, it could be that smaller government attracts more immigrants, or there could be no causal relationship here. Well, first off, smaller government could attract more immigrants, and those immigrants could have been, once they got to the United States, voted for bigger government, but then their votes not really resulting in any change of policy. I mean, that seems like such an obvious possibility to me that he doesn't even entertain, right? He just imagines, he just has this false double bind in his head. The next statement here, he says, I'm merely showing that the persistent claims of immigrants causing an increase in the size of government do not match the facts. Now, this statement is strictly false, right? Because what does it say? Persistent claims of immigrants causing an increase in the size of government do not match the facts. Why? Because history, right? This statement is not only, first off, not only does this statement miss the point, right, which is that we're not talking about turn of the century, we're talking about today, right? Not only does it miss the point, not only does his data not show what he says it shows, right? He says it shows, in fact, he even says it himself. These are merely correlations, and I am not arguing that more immigration results in smaller government. He says so himself right here, right? And so the claim that immigrants cause an increase in the size of government do not match the fact. They could cause an increase in the size of government over and above what would have happened had they not shown up back then, right? So first off, so this statement, in a pure, just dealing with everything he has said, in fact, just assuming everything he has said is correct in this post, this statement here at the end is strictly false. All right, so that's another thing. But of course, I'm kind of beating around the bush here in terms of what he's missing out on. I mean, and the people who are watching this video on this channel, it's pretty obvious what he's missing out on, which is that he's talking about white immigrants from long ago compared to Mexican immigrants today. Mexican, African, and Indian and Northeast Asian type peoples, right? Now, he says immigrants don't grow government. Well, this statement here, well, the title, Immigrants Don't Grow Government, I mean, this statement is I mean, if I want to be like a real, stick up your butt person, I would say that's strictly false, because there are all sorts of immigrants in various times in history that have expanded government or decreased the size of government in the various countries that they were immigrating to. Right? I could be kind of a prick and treat this as a global historical claim and say, oh, clearly false, because when the Koreans immigrated to Japan, they tended to support parties that supported smaller government or something like that, something real asinine, right? But I know what he's talking about. He's talking about the United States. He says immigrants don't grow government, in parentheses, in the United States. That's really what he's talking about. Okay. But the thing is, this is not past tense. This is not a past tense statement. This is a present tense statement. Okay? And this statement here, well, we know the political views of Hispanics in the United States, right? And Hispanics in the United States support expanding government. And one thing that that we know about mestizos and Africans and various Asian populations, I believe Northeast Asian. I mean, this is just me going off of memory, right? You can look these up yourself, see how they actually voted in various elections. But Northeast Asian type peoples tend to vote for the Democrat Party about 7-2. Blacks. And it doesn't matter the immigrant status. I'm talking about race here, not immigrant status, right? Immigrant status is not really an important thing, right? In terms of who's going to expand government, right? And when people say the word immigrants, that I am for reducing immigration to the United States, that's not. It's not about immigrants. It's about race, okay? And this is something that that the hardcore leftists. They call themselves leftists, but really they're I don't like the term leftist. I believe the term should be universitarian, right? Because that's really what, when you really get down to it, that's really what leftist means in practice. It means views corresponding to the general consensus of the universities, right? I lost my train of thought. But yeah, that's really what people are talking about, and that's what leftists, quote unquote, but really universitarians understand, which is that all this talk about immigration is really about race, and it's always been about race. Okay. There may be some people, who identify with the Republican Party and support restrictions on immigration to the United States, who imagine that it's not about race, that they think that I'm for law and order, and and there may be a few people who genuinely believe that, but it's largely an academic point at this point, because that's not where the immigrants are, because the immigrants are not coming from Europe anymore. Okay, they're coming from Mexico, they're coming from Africa, they're coming from other Spanish-speaking countries and Brazil. They're coming from South and Southeast Asia for the most part. Not so much from China or Northeast Asia, but South and Southeast Asia. All of Africa, and Spanish and Portuguese-speaking American countries. That's where the immigrants are coming from. And these immigrant populations overwhelmingly support larger government. Okay. Now, perhaps what Alex Nowrasteh would say, and this is kind of the argument, this is one of the arguments that Bryan Caplan made, was that, well, when you bring in mestizos into the United States, the white people in the United States become more conservative. That is, they support less government when they're surrounded by people that are not like them. Right? Whereas in more racially homogenous countries, the whites tend to support bigger government. And perhaps there's an argument to be made there, but the problem is that will work to a point, right? That will work so long as the increase in support for smaller government among whites offsets the increase in support for bigger government among this burgeoning mestizo population, right? Because when you take a look at California, like the state of California, I believe basically refutes Bryan Caplan. It's a big, giant, living refutation of everything Bryan Caplan has said on immigration, right? You could say, well, immigration results in white people becoming more libertarian. Okay, but the thing is, and perhaps at first, the increased libertarianism among the whites not only offsets the increased statism of these new immigrant groups, but more than offsets, with the result being that there's greater libertarian, that the general public is more libertarian as a result of bringing in this non-libertarian population. It seems paradoxical, but it's not, and that could happen at first. Bryan Caplan has some evidence to say that happens, and Spock made a response to saying that evidence is not true, that the whites don't actually become more libertarian when you bring in mestizos in. Right? Spock has actually challenged that factual claim by Bryan Caplan. But I'm not even going to challenge that. Grant him that for the sake of argument. So what? Now in California, mestizos outnumber whites. So is California going to be a libertarian paradise because the whites are just going to be so, frantically libertarian that they're going to have a libertarian government? Or South Africa? Wow, South Africa must be massively libertarian because white people only constitute around 10% of the population there. Well, shit, they must be so incredibly libertarian that that South Africa is virtually anarcho-capitalist, right? And that's something that Bryan Caplan, even if his claim was true, which I don't think it is, but say it's true, is irrelevant. Because once the white people become a minority, it doesn't matter how libertarian they are, because white people aren't calling the shots anymore. See? And this statement, immigrants don't grow government, right? Because why? Because the correlation between immigration and government over the past 100 years has been negative relative to GDP. Well, whoop-de-doo. So that means bringing in 10 million mestizos. These mestizos are all like libertarians waiting in the wings, or they're going to make the white people so libertarian that it's going to more than offset their statism. Like, And the thing is, Alex Nowrasteh, this post here doesn't even delve into that at all. It doesn't delve into that at all. It's just saying immigration, immigrants. Well, immigrants from where? But the thing is, he's made the world flat, at least in this post. I suspect his general outlook is completely divorced from any texture, right? You know what it's like? It's like a cartographer trying to navigate through an area without reference to elevation, right? And that's kind of what he's doing here. It's like, I mean, he's completely not even dealing with the subject matter, right? I mean, for example, he's talking about, like, let's look at a lot of his posts. I think he makes a lot of posts on immigration. Well, let's see. Yeah, let's look at his blog posts. Immigrants don't grow government. Let's go to more blog posts here. Alex Nowrasteh. Updates on President Obama's immigration enforcement record. Immigration's real impact on wages and employment. 5 absurd overreaction to the surge in child migrants. House border bill would treat children worse than adults. It's talking about legalization or amnesty of unlawful immigrants. Right? He has all these posts about immigration, but he doesn't even deal with the issue as it exists. He doesn't deal with the immigrant population, the immigrant populations, plural, relative to the native populations, relative to each other. He's just not even... He's not even functioning in the real world. This post just says immigrants. Oh, okay. So, well, you know what that's like? That's like talking about, the kinds of people who go to Harvard and say, oh, well, they're students. Right? The kind of people who go to Harvard are students. They are people. Right? They're people. Well, what else do you want to know? They're people. And plus, we put a sticker on them. And if you want to say that the presence of people causes an increase in the size of government, well, I will assure you that there is no relation, or there's a negative relation, right? I mean, you could say something like, let's take a look at, how about this? You could respond to someone saying, well, look, when you have people who have support bigger government, when they have more kids, the long-term effect of that is bigger government, right? Because you have parents who support bigger government, and there may be genetic reasons for it. I personally believe in genetic reasons for it, but let's just let's shunt that aside, right? And say it's all environmental. If it's all environmental, fine, whatever. They're passing on their values to their children, and the children grow up to be pro bigger government, right? And that's the argument that's made. And so you have some libertarians who say that people who support bigger government should be sterilized, or the number of kids they should have can have should be reduced in order to reduce their support for government, right? And Alex Nowrasteh, if he used the same kind of reasoning he uses for immigration on that sterilization of statists policy, he would say, tut tut tut. Let me show you here some correlations between birth rate and size of government. And what we see here is a no correlation, or a weak and mixed correlation, or even a negative correlation between population increase in number of people, and the size of government. Well, whoop-de-doo, but the question is, what kind of people are we talking about? Who? Which people? This post just says people, right? It says, well, immigrants. Right? And that's really what... that's really how absurd Alex Nowrasteh's analysis of immigration is, right? Just apply it to anything else that requires differentiation between people. He's just not differentiating between people. He's refusing to so much as address the subject matter to which he has written a bajillion different posts on. And this is so fucking typical of libertarians. And I guess they think that it's going to earn them some points sometime down the line, but it hasn't so far, and I don't see any evidence that it will. I guess there's, the idea, on like Reason, like TV, they were interviewing some libertarian. I think there's all sorts of dumb, useless libertarian organizations out there. They're introducing some libertarian organization guy, and they're asking him, "So, how do you think we're gonna get the black people?" And he said all these talking points. Well, black people would benefit from ending the drug war. Black people would benefit from it being easier for them to start businesses, so restrictions on business formation would help them. An increased economy, and all the benefits from free markets would benefit blacks especially, and increase the wages for black men especially, which has since dipped below the wages of black women. And, and he's saying all these talking points, but the problem is all these talking points are no different than what libertarians have been doing for the past 30 years at least. And you're not getting blacks to be libertarian. Libertarianism is still, male and pale, and it's not, and you're not going to get these people. I mean, they're just not looking at the facts. They're just not looking at that their message is not accepted by blacks and mestizos. And this is something, and I see this in like. When I was arguing with anarchists, and by anarchists I mean like red anarchists, I mean Bakunin, Proudhon, Kropotkin, okay? I mean, and the proto-Marxists, all right? I mean the anarchists when I say anarchists, not polycentric law people. Two totally different traditions, two totally different things. There's mutualists who try to be dumb and try to like say that, well, they're kind of related. The traditions intertwine. The traditions don't intertwine. They're two completely different things. The only similarity between them is that they both call themselves anarchist. Okay, but that aside, I forget where I was going with this. Yeah, so they've been trying. So anyway, yeah. When talking to the red anarchists, right, they would continue to try to explain their positions to me, right. And I guess they kind of had this idea that I just didn't understand what they were saying. That if I really understood, right? And I mean, fucking A. I read 2 books by Kropotkin. I read half a book by Proudhon. Okay, I watched Mr. 1001 Nights' video, The Golden Rule. I've spent so many hours listening to them. Okay, this YouTube user, The Left Libertarian, I watched several videos by him, responded to him, right, gotten in a long, epic forum discussions with classical anarchists on Facebook, right, and again, and I mean, that's not a huge investment. I mean, maybe I should have read 5 books instead of just 2.5. Maybe if I had read 5, that would have done it. But I have an idea that I understood. I don't think I really understand it now. I think I've long forgotten, right? It's use it or lose it, and I didn't really use it going forward, so I basically don't know it now. But there was this constant conception that I just didn't understand. I just didn't understand what a syndicate was. I just didn't understand that socialism means worker control of the means of production. It doesn't mean welfare statism. I just didn't understand that because I didn't understand the historical references, right? But of course I did understand. I did understand what they were saying. Okay? And maybe libertarians have a little bit of a better case to make that the mestizos and Africans don't understand what they are saying. It's possible. But I've seen many times black people who haven't heard libertarian arguments before hear them, become enamored by them, and then become disillusioned once they hear more complex statist arguments in response, right? Because where's their bias? Their bias is towards statism. Maybe that's a cultural... I think it's a genetic thing. I think it's an overwhelming genetic thing. You see it on the continent of Africa, right? Where basically Africa is the economy is very political, is a way to describe it, right? To start a business, you need approval by the government. Property rights are not secure. It's political, right? Everything is political. You want to start a mine, you need to talk to a politician, right? You want to start, I don't know, you want to start a farm, you need land. Where are you going to get land? You need to contact the big man, whoever the political, whatever political connections you need to deal with. You have to deal with them if you want to do anything there, right? And if they change their mind, well, they'll just take what you make. Okay, it's very unsecure property rights, very unsecure legal system. It's like a mafia-run economy, right? That's a good way to describe it. Mafia, thugs, gangstas, right? That's what happens when blacks take over an area. And when you say to them, "Hey, let's have firm property rights and let's talk about free enterprise," that's not speaking their language. I think at a genetic level. All right, but if you want to say, "Oh, that's backward thinking," modern buzzwords that I've heard from I fucking love science has told me that epigenetics explains everything, and that the only reason why a raccoon is different from a human is because of epigenetic effects and histone rotations, right? I mean, you could fine, genes don't exist, fine, it's all cultural. But if it's all cultural, well, this culture seems to be behaving as if it were a genetic effect. Right? That's how powerful these cultural effects apparently are. Okay, so basically, even if it's fine. For the sake of argument, it's all culture, but it's not going away. It's not changing anytime soon, right? So, and libertarians have shown no systematic way of converting these people, right? They have shown no way, and they have shown no serious attempts at outreach. They're not serious about trying. It seems like they're not serious about trying to convince these people, right? It seems that they're mostly narcissists trying to advance their own personal identity within the libertarian movement, but that's something else. Okay, but anyway, but the point is, libertarianism isn't going anywhere. Okay, you can use, and even if you bring up these posts, from the Cato Institute by libertarians, right? So they're a little bit suspect already. And they say that, well, the number of libertarians is expanding by this, that, or the other measure, right? And let's say they're true. Let's say, fine, okay, sure, they're true. Libertarianism is expanding. But the thing is, these posts generally don't take into account race. They don't take into account the centrality of race. They do take into account race. I linked to there was a Cato post talking about how libertarianism and libertarian ideas are increasing in the U.S. by their measure. I think it's a bit dubious. I think Cato's a bit of a vested interest, but they didn't, and they had a little section on race, and I guess but they didn't show any change in the proportion, right? So look, libertarians are getting increasingly Hispanic and black, and that's fine. But the black population as a proportion is not getting more libertarian. The Hispanic population, right, really mestizo, racially mixed Spanish Amerindian population, is not getting more libertarian. Now, libertarians are getting more black and mestizo because the few black and mestizo libertarians that there are, right, are increasing in number simply because the black and mestizo population is increasing in number. Okay. But the black population and the mestizo population itself is not becoming more libertarian. Okay, perhaps the white population is becoming more libertarian, perhaps, but even that's a little bit debatable because Cato Institute, probably has a rather robust definition of what is a libertarian, right? In order to make their numbers seem bigger, and so. This post here is just, it's like, I keep thinking about that cartoon, Fooly Cooley. At the very end, they have the irons, and the irons come down, and they say, they're trying to iron out the wrinkles so we can't think. Well, that's exactly what this is. He's ironing out the wrinkles, maybe not so he can't think, but as a result, he can't think about immigration for real. He has all these posts on immigration, but, no substance to it. It's air. It's this person, if, for example, if we want to talk about crime in Sweden, they use these labels, immigrant. Do they have the sticker put on their forehead that says immigrant or born in Sweden? Right? No, are they niggers? Are they fucking niggers? That's the question, right? It's not a question of, are they born in Sweden, right? No, nobody cares about where they are born, right? Immigration status is not what's going to determine political party support, right? In fact, there's evidence. I know of evidence with Muslims. Now, Islam is not a race. I'll say this: Islam is not a race, but it's basically a race. Second generation Muslims are more Islamic than first generations. Now, I don't know about second generation mestizo immigrants being more or less statist than first generations, but it's probably not that much different. Okay, the idea of assimilation is a myth, unless they're white. Right? If they're white, then assimilation has happened. Right? But we've had these black people who haven't assimilated. They were set free in 1865, and they haven't assimilated since then. Now, some people, when they say, well, no, see, what we need to do is we need to deny white public spaces. And that's what civil rights was about. It was about the denial of white public spaces. You couldn't have a public swimming pool for whites or a business, right? And also denial of white private spaces. Right? You couldn't have a school for whites. You couldn't have a pool for whites. Also, you couldn't have a business for whites. Right? And once we get rid of that, once we deny all white public spaces and some white private spaces, right? White private spaces that are close to the public domain, right? Like businesses. Once we do that, then the assimilation of blacks can occur, right? And that's one way to think about blacks. They're basically an immigrant population to the white United States, but they don't assimilate. They never assimilate. The Irish assimilate. We don't even know what an Irish, none of these European ethnicities like even really exist anymore. Nobody cares. It's all white. And I think that I don't really have to say that much on this post here, because I think most libertarians, maybe they secretly know or secretly have an inkling that their flat earth, that their raceless analysis of everything is it just prevents them from, again, it's like a cartographer trying to navigate a continent without reference to elevation. Right? It's just, it's like, well, you don't want to sterilize people with IQs below 60. And the reason I know that is because here's the correlation between people, the number of people born, and size of government. Or you could say, like, for example, well, let's talk about, what kind of people go to Harvard University, right? That would be a question when trying to figure out what are the effects of a Harvard education. Well, I think the first thing you need to figure out is what kind of people are going there in the first place, right? And if you just go, well, they are immigrants to Harvard University, right? Let's look at the correlation between immigrants to Harvard University and life outcomes or something. Right? And you say, oh, look, Harvard is having a huge effect on their life outcomes because we have immigrants to Harvard University, and here's their life outcomes. So clearly, Harvard is having huge impacts on these people. Right? No, you need to look at the kind of people that are coming in. Right? And similar, you could say, well, here's the kind of people who are coming into the United States, and here's what's happening. Right? Here's immigrants to the United States, and here's the outcomes. Look, the general correlation is blah, 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 blah. Right? But of course, what people? And moreover, he's combining different populations over different periods of time. He's aggregating together the effects of white immigrants from Europe in the 1910s to the 1930s with the effects of mestizo immigrants from Mexico today. Right? He's mixing it all together completely. Right? He's ironing out the wrinkles. And as a result, he can't think. And that's libertarianism on race in a nutshell.